Okay, I didn't know if I'd get a video done this week. My computer's been acting up. I heard that Microsoft had a problem with Windows, and that may be part of the problem. I kind of think they do that to mess up everybody's computer and they have to buy a new one. So I just totally despise Windows updates. Uh, but anyway, while I can get on the computer and do a short video, I want to do one um, from my book, Alachua Ambush. And this is going to be a short chapter in it. And this chapter 11, suspicion of having treasonable intercourse, and as in negotiating with the enemy. So, and what this is that two slaves were captured and suspected of trading with the Seminoles or cooperating with the Seminoles for raiding the people on the roadway as the Seminole highwaymen pounced on the mail carriers. So this is a very interesting story, and I really hadn't heard it written up much anywhere else. So I had to research it and write about it. So sorry I don't have the fancy background this time. I'm just trying to go low key and make a video while I can while the computer's still alive. Uh, I might have to get a new computer myself soon. So anyway, the capture of Coahuilche's mother and daughter with the Negro boy near Fort Mellon brings rumor of slaves supplying the Indians with gunpowder. That's all the proof the citizens in St. Augustine need to justify their fears of possible slave uprisings or Indian attacks. Slaves from Colonel Hanson's plantation are arrested for aiding the Indians. A grand jury is organized in St. Augustine. So this is aide to General Armistead, commander of the force in Florida. Lieutenant Newton writes to Colonel John Hanson in St. Augustine. John Hanson was a high-ranking militia general in St. Augustine. He is one of the wealthiest plantation owners. Writing from Fort King, July 9th, 1840. This is on Adjutant General Letters Received, 1840, A204, page 13. I am directed by him to say that your Negroes have been arrested on strong suspicion, having supplied the enemy with the gunpowder and giving them information which has proved fatal to so many travelers on the Piccolata Road. The mother of Wildcat and Sam the Negro, lately taken, confirm these suspicions as to your slaves and others in St. Augustine, and it is expected by the commanding general that in efforts to ferret out the persons engaged in this criminal intercourse with the enemy, you'll be aided by yourself and others who are having slaves in the vicinity of St. Augustine, hold your property and lives at their mercy. So a grand jury is organized. And let me skip on. So two of the slaves arrested. This letter is from Lieutenant Irving Newton again to Captain Bliss, Assistant Adjutant General for General Armistead. Fort King, East Florida, July 7th, 1840, in obedience to Special Order Number 33, Headquarters of the Army in South, I proceeded without delay to St. Augustine, where I arrived on the evening of the 3rd, having made affidavits before Judge Bronson that I suspected two slaves, George and Joe, belonging to Colonel Hanson, of aiding and abetting the Indians in their war against the whites. These Negroes were thereupon arrested by the marshal and separately confined in a jail of St. Augustine. Judge Bronson declining to give authority for their removal out of the limits of the county. So usually the Superior Court might move elsewhere, maybe to Jacksonville or something, but the judge said, no, they're not moving out of the county. Though nothing positive may be proved against these Negroes and others in St. Augustine, I have long entertained the suspicion that they were leagued with the enemy and gave the information which has led to results so often fatal to the travelers on the Piccolata Road. Wildcat's forbearings to attack several small parties which must have passed him and the plunder of the players' wagons. That's the actors' wagons that I told in a previous uh, program here. Almost immediately afterwards, as evidence of the specific purpose of his last incursions and the information he possessed. Colonel Hanson's Negroes were all aware of the arrival of Forbes' company at Picolata some days before the attack, and it is generally believed that the enemy were informed of it. So, I'm reading directly from the actual letters that I transcribed in the book. So the N word used is what is actually in the letters. I'm not changing anything that the letters say, except maybe adding punctuation. I've long suspected these Negroes of collusion with the enemy because, first, many of them are Indian Negroes, have relations among them, at the same time that intercourse with Indians brings with it great profit to themselves. Second, because Colonel Hanson's house, holding out every inducement for an attack, is never invaded, while the Indians passing through the hammock in the rear of his house make their attack from it on the Picolata Road and go 30 miles north to commit depredations on other plantations, showing themselves openly at these plantations to the Negroes there. While it is little remarkable that Colonel Hanson's slaves, who are almost constantly in the hammocks contiguous to his plantation, pretend they never see an Indian or a sign of one. In arresting these two Negroes of Colonel Hanson, I have acted upon information derived from the officers of the Army and from facts communicated by interpreters and Sam, who was lately captured by Colonel Harney's command. Sam is one of the uh, blacks who was captured by Colonel Harney near Lake Mellon. I think one during the previous month in June. Yeah, let's see. I'll continue on. This is General Armistead to Judge Bronson in St. Augustine, July 15th, 1840, Fort King. General Armistead, of course, commanding the forces in Florida, to Judge Bronson, who's kind of the head judge. And he actually has a house that you can visit in Palatka. I have the honor to acknowledge the receipt of your communication on the 8th instant. Had it not been for severe indisposition, I would have before this seen you in regard to Colonel Hanson's Negroes, who were arrested by Lieutenant Newton on suspicion of having treasonable intercourse with the Indians. It will be well here to state what evidence can be induced against these Negroes in order that you may arrive at a decision in regard to their continued confinement or release. The mother of Wildcat informed two of Wildcat's last attack on the Picolata Road. He was supplied with a dinner by Colonel Hanson's Negroes, as also with some powder. Although this was actually the Jason's plantation, as I told earlier in a previous video. The Negro Sam, lately taken from Wildcat, says that on the return of this chief from his last expedition, he exulted in his success, exhibited leather bags of powder as proof of it. The Negro Joe, now with Wildcat, who usually accompanies his chief in his forays, was telling Sam the particulars of this last one when he was stopped by the same time that if all the whites were like Colonel Hanson, there would be no difficulty between the Indians and themselves. Sam further says that some months ago, Wildcat told Phillips John, a hostile Negro, to go and see his cousin, believed to be George, near St. Augustine and obtain some gunpowder from him. John refused to do so at the time. Phillips John was probably one of the allies of King Philip, Wildcat or Kawakashi's father. This is the principal evidence against Colonel Hanson's Negroes, confirm the suspicions entertained by many citizens of St. Augustine, by officers of the Army generally, especially by those who have been stationed of the east of the St. John's, These Negroes range in all the hammocks and part of the country in which the Indians secrete themselves when they come up, and no vigilance ever, if any, was exercised, could prevent them from aiding and abetting the enemy, but supplying them with gunpowder and giving them any information sought after. So the Secretary of War writes back, demanding an investigation uh, be done of what's going on. And he hires Westcott, assistant counsel, to aid the district attorney, Mr. Douglas, in the leading proceedings. I'm just kind of paraphrasing, going through this. And James Westcott Jr. Was an important territorial legislator and one of the first two senators with uh, David Levy Yulee. So General Armistead continues, orders that the uh, immediately send Negro Sam and Wildcat's mother with sufficient guard to St. Augustine to be delivered to the U.S. Marshal and may be indicted by Judge Bronson. Should their presence not be required of the judge, they can return immediately to Fort Mellon. So they are captured by Colonel Harney's dragoons, and they're currently at Fort Mellon. And Colonel Hanson, he complains that his slaves were arrested by Lieutenant Newton, a military officer who has no authority to make civil arrests. Hanson complains that he's losing labor for the general sends his reply by Lieutenant Newton, who made the arrest, who is serving as the general's aide de camp, saying that General Armistead can see nothing reprehensible in the manner of arrest of your slaves by his aide, and continues on as notorious to all has been and is prolonged by slaves and others who give intelligence to the enemy and supply them with powder. The commanding general is determined to arrest these treasonable dealings by bringing to trial all who may be suspected of lending assistance to the enemy. And going on that a grand jury is organized in St. Augustine with upwards of 30 witnesses, embracing officers of the Army, Negroes, captured Indians, but no bill was found against the slaves, according to what the newspaper says here. In November, Miccosukee warriors led by Wildcat Kawakachi raid Colonel Hanson's plantation. All the blankets and winter clothing of the slaves are taken, and 3 slaves are forced to leave with the Indians and their bow. Kawakachi raids Colonel Hanson's plantation, takes some of the supplies and the slaves. During the flight across Hanson's field, those slaves escaped and ran to St. Augustine. An Army detachment from Picolata responds by attempting to sneak up on the plantation. Because they believe the Indians are still there, there are none but the plantation guard, mistakes the soldiers for Indians and fires on them, killing the sergeant and wounding Lieutenant Graham. I think that's Lieutenant John Graham. Fortunately, a visiting physician at the plantation immediately tends to the wounds. So the soldiers come and who they tauntingly display outside Fort Cyril near St. Augustine. Due to the small ineffectiveness of the small garrisons at the forts south of St. Augustine that don't have enough men, Fort Hanson, Peyton, and Fulton are abandoned. Now, after 5 years of war in Florida, St. Augustine is defenseless, just like it was at the beginning of the war. The only 2 working plantations outside St. Augustine are owned by Colonel John Hanson and Mr. Edwin T. Jenks. All others have been destroyed. Because of the attacks, the owners reside in the town and leave their slaves virtually. And the Richmond Enquirer newspaper says, however callous may be Northern hearts, these 2 owners of 140 slaves feel a responsibility. They have 140 mouths to feed, 140 persons to clothe, lodge, and protect. Were the country quiet, it would be easier, but it's not easy when the Seminole Indians come when they please to destroy crops and plunder the houses. So George and Joe are taken before the grand jury, all the uh, everybody makes their testimony. What happens? Well, Joey, what happens? So I searched newspapers and finally found in the Wetumpka Argus uh, where it says no bill was found against the slaves. And this like 6 months later, and they were released. So all the testimony was hearsay. It was circumstantial. Nobody actually had proof that these slaves were aiding the Seminole warriors. So they were released. And that was found like on page, it's like a 2 sentence paragraph found in the back of the newspaper. It was not a front page story like the other ones. So that's interesting. A case where these slaves were suspected of aiding the Indians. They were brought before a court to be tried and possibly executed if they had been found guilty, but there was no proof to it. So they ended up letting them go. So I thought you might find that an interesting story, and I wanted to do a quick video. Sorry, I have no graphics. I'm just trying to kick out a quick video while the computer's working, and I'll talk to you later.